Hey everybody, I'm DiStefano. Thanks to Sarah and Maureen and the center and to all of you for coming. I'm excited, and I'm also really excited to hear all the other fellows. I'm working on a novel about 3 generations of an Italian-American family, and what I'll read tonight is from the 2nd generation that takes place in 1984. And this section is called Antonia is Expecting. After going to see The Natural, the only movie they could agree on because of its equal screen time devoted to both baseball and Robert Redford, Antonia and Craig sat at a small table along the brick wall of Roberto's Ristorante in the Bronx and argued about what to order, what to share. When a waiter passed by with a steak, Antonia swatted its smell from her nose, telling Craig, "I might puke." This aversion to meat had happened only once before. When she looked up, nauseous, feeling as if the room had been plucked away and thrown into a choppy sea, Craig stamped out his cigarette and beamed. "Could you be?" he asked. "I'm 40, she said. "It's just from all that popcorn." But she slid her hand into her skirt pocket, pressed her fingers into her abdomen, and knew. Now, nearing the end of her 22nd week, she rests on the bed with 3 pillows propped behind her and stares at her ankles, thinking they aren't swollen but fat, and not pregnant fat, but fat fat. Craig, shaving in the bathroom, calls to her over the running water, "My parents want us over for dinner tomorrow." Antonia can see him in the mirror, fixing his eyes on himself as he runs the razor in slick trips up his neck. When he rinses the razor's head, he looks to her through the mirror. He used to smoke while he shaved, a lit cigarette waiting in the soap dish for intermittent pulls, but he's quit cold turkey since the pregnancy, gnawing his fingernails down to nubs. She watches him tug the skin of his cheek tight to shave it clean. "Nona cooking?" Antonia asks, scratching the arch of her foot with her other heel. His grandmother, almost 90, stocks up at the market along Arthur Ave after her morning mass in order to cook more elaborate meals whenever they visit. Antonia has joked with Craig that Nona's cooking is the secret, real reason she stayed with him through the years. "Of course," he tells her. "I told her I'd help shop, but I'm swamped tomorrow." He shaves away the last bit of cream, replaces the razor on its caddy, and cups his hands under the faucet to splash his cheeks clean. When he opens the mirror to grab his polo aftershave, Antonia can't see his face anymore. "I'll go," she offers to his back. She's always liked how he shaves before sleeping, smelling of cigarettes and aftershave when he enters their bed and soon begins to snore. He says the routine is to save time, so he can wake up, throw on clothes, and get to the hospital, though he must enjoy how she rolls over and sniffs playfully at his clavicles before sleeping. She'd fallen in love with him partially because of his scent, the paradox of it, a smoking pulmonologist, the hypocrite who then spoke empathetically with his patients about asthma, quitting, how considerate we need to be to our bodies. But tonight, like every night since he quit, the smell of his aftershave is too strong. She'll smell the fragrance until sleep comes, if sleep comes, and even wake to find it clinging to his empty half of the bed. "You should rest," he tells her, kneeling into the mattress. "I don't want to rest. I want to do something, anything." "You're in the ICU every workday doing something." He puts his hand atop her stomach, and she can feel his wedding ring through the fabric of her nightgown, the silver still warm from running his hands under the water. He rubs her in little circles and asks, "She give any punts yet?" Maintaining radio silence. "Soon," he says. "You said she again. Please, don't do that." He slides his hand away from her belly in surrender as he lies back against the headboard. Saying it feels too, he pauses, clinical. "Then don't say anything." After the oscillating fan on their bureau passes over the room once, twice, Craig finally asks for one of Antonia's pillows. After she hands it over, he asks, "Will you really go with her tomorrow?" "Will she speak Italian the whole time?" "You know the drill," Craig says, turning away from her and settling himself into the pillow. "You speak English, she'll gesture, you two will get the gist of each other." Antonia edges her butt down so she can lie flat on her back. She hates lying like this, wishing she could just deflate her belly, roll over, and get some goddamn sleep already. Though she knows she can't, she thinks she can feel the exact spot where the needle for her amniocentesis weeks ago was inserted. Because she's geriatric, because her first pregnancy didn't end in some frantic, joyful delivery room, the doctor said this would assure everybody that their baby, healthy no doubt, would soon be thumping on her insides. Antony is startled by her upstairs neighbors drinking on their fire escape, a bottle falling to the alley and cat scent scrambling, hissing. After making sure Craig's still snoring, Antonia, simultaneously exhausted and as awake as can be, rocks herself out of bed and snags his stethoscope from the bureau. Sitting on their living room couch, she places the earpieces on opposite sides of her belly and taps the stethoscope's diaphragm. "Kick," she begs into it. "You little thing, please, kick." Thanks, everybody.
Thank you to the center and Maureen and Sarah and to my fellow fellows. And thank you everyone for being here. I'm going to read a little bit from a novel that I'm working on about mental health and pregnancy. When you're sent to the hospital for being crazy, every doctor and nurse asks you the same set of questions, over and over. Like no one is taking notes or reading anyone else's. Like your answers will change suddenly and your diagnosis will hurtle naked into the light. Like the repetition will wear you down to a small kernel of truth. And you start to think that maybe these hospital people, maybe they aren't really any different from you. Maybe they don't know what they're doing here either. You start to think, I've heard all this before. I can bow this examination to whichever angle I please. And then you see the tags on your wrist. Name, birth date, name and address of hospital. Like you were property that could be found and returned. A creature that can no longer care for herself, who cannot be trusted at her word. A lawsuit to prevent. Someone you should wash your hands before seeing. And so you decide to speak strategically, being honest only when it is advantageous to be honest, omitting whatever it might be advantageous to omit. You play by their rules. You do not only as you are told, but as tone suggests. You radiate compliance. You maintain this calm control until the middle of the night, when you wake up to find yourself here, still, with the white light coming in through the cracked door, the sounds of an orderly's footsteps in the hall as he paces, listening, prepared to act at any sound or shadow of an attempt to escape. You remember the locked double doors of this and every psychiatric ward you've seen, and you remember that no matter how expertly or strategically you answer their questions, no one is going to give you a key. You don't work here. You are not one of them. Have you felt down or sad this past week? All of the time? Some of the time? Rarely? Not at all? Have you felt the opposite, like you were on top of the world? Are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself or others? Any thoughts of suicide? Do you have a plan for suicide? Today, Maddie wondered, or ever? But doesn't everyone have a plan for suicide at some point? Hasn't everyone thought it through, if I had to do it, this is the way to go? The old freezing versus burning, overdose versus gunshot kinds of questions you might get to with a stranger at the end of a long, melancholy night. It was the same set of questions when she was 15 and drunk and decided to take a whole bottle of Advil because her life had become nothing but a hopeless, unbearable burden. Maddie had known it probably wasn't going to kill her, but she couldn't quite bring herself to climb up onto the bathroom windowsill and out onto the ledge of the building, where a fall from the 7th floor would have brought her story to a swift, decisive end. Did it count as a plan for suicide even if you knew you wouldn't go through with it? One of her wholesome horseback riding roommates had found her unconscious and called 911. That was the first time. The worst that could have happened back then was that they'd kick her out of boarding school. It was the outcome she was hoping for, but with standardized test scores as high as Maddie's and a net worth the size of her parents, the school was willing to give her another chance. People talked, of course. The other girls, the teachers, stranded in the New England countryside with nothing to dissect but each other's faults. Maddie didn't mind. She wore the badge of her hospitalization with some pride, quietly reassured that her anguish had garnered her a wisdom greater than the other girls. The next time she found herself in a hospital bed answering questions about mania and suicide, 15 years had passed. Maddie had grown up. She had graduated college and arrived at the threshold of adulthood. She was on the brink of stepping through the open doorway of parenthood, and that teenage hospitalization lay far behind her, barely visible through the screen of all her small successes. You might think that she would have wanted still to talk about it, to write, but it felt so good to forget. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for being here. The work is a collection of linked or nested stories, and it follows a Nigerian community in Houston. One of those stories is called Places Where We Feel Good. The opening premise is that Sister Linda's only daughter, Iguh, 17 years of age, has caught child, and who the father is, the girl isn't telling. I will now read an excerpt from that story. The real injury occurred nearly 22 years earlier when Linda landed at George Bush International Airport with her 2-year-old son, Ike, and the younger James on her hip. She rented a room from a kind Ghanaian couple whose kids had long flown the coop and missed the sound of children in the house. Linda got a job at a chicken and waffles place about a 30-minute walk from the house. She came home from 12-hour shifts, reeking of stale oil, and with just enough energy to pick her boys up from the landlady and cart them upstairs, where she unclothed them and climbed into bed with one in each arm. Night school was an early option, but subtract the bills and twice a month remittances to her husband, there was never enough. Her husband back home in Nigeria had stayed on at his job as a baker in one of the national factories. The plan had been for her to come first with their sons, and he would join them when he had built up a sizable safety net. Then the workers' union went on strike, and the job dried up. And so night school never happened. She scrimped and saved. She joined a predominantly Yoruba church. She prayed for more. Linda's only joy was when she went home for Christmas with her sons. She shopped for gifts months before the trip, always the sales, preferably name brand. She stuffed one giant suitcase with all of the gifts she had bought for her people back home. Everyone wanted something, this gadget or that pair of sneakers or just a little pocket money. But for her husband, Linda always took pleasure in asking what to bring him. Just bring yourself, he would say each year. And each year she wholeheartedly believed that this was the one in which their American dream would finally begin. The dream was as undefined as sleep, but she had the sense that it would not take shape if she remained as she was, standing on one leg in the present while the other rested on her past for support. What is your hurry? Her husband would tease. America's not running away. No, America was not running away, but it certainly wasn't standing still for her. 4 years deep in American soil, and still Linda did not feel she could claim a single inch of it. Where other women had their husbands and owned their own businesses, she had a visa that was hell-bent on expiration and no way to stay. Friends told her to find an Akata man willing to marry her for a fee. The monetary price was steep, but the matrimonial one was unconscionable, so Linda put her mind to finding her own legitimacy. During one Christmas trip home, Linda became pregnant with her only daughter, Iguh. It was not lost on her that this was finally her opportunity to take root. She was to be the mother of an American child. She was to finally have her anchor. Slowly, the years of planning fell into line. She would earn a degree, she would make money, she would buy a house and build another one in Nigeria just because she could. As the months went by, Linda spent increasing amounts of money on international calling cards. She called her husband every night and pressed the phone to her belly for hours. "You're wasting airtime," her husband complained, but the lost minutes were of little cost to Linda. This wasn't her first pregnancy, but now she was alone, without a home of her own, and feeling unlike she had ever felt before, exposed yet expectant of something spectacular. When she spoke to her pastor about this feeling, he firmly placed a hand on her forehead and proclaimed that she must not allow her faith to falter. "Doubt," he said, "invites the devil." And so Linda insulated her mind from the unnamed anxiety. 2 strokes after midnight on the longest day of the year, when her daughter was delivered, fingers and toes correct, Linda felt she had finally arrived. "There is no dream," her husband confessed. It alarmed her. "Things aren't the same anymore," he said. He didn't sound like himself, and she told him so. He remained silent, and worry wrestled her soul. She could just hang up, she thought. She could turn away and not see what she had feared all along. She could allow her husband to go on speaking his nonsense and hope that eventually he would see right. But she didn't want hope. She had been feeding on hope alone for nearly 5 years, and it had become measly. What she needed was something more exact. She needed proof. So she questioned her husband again, and this time he spoke. America was no longer on his mind, he said, because he now found himself wholly occupied by another woman. Linda absorbed the blow well enough. She knew her husband was capable of falling in love 10 times a day. She also knew that he was, above all else, loyal. And so she didn't allow herself to reflect once on his confession. Rather, she sought ways to suture the life she knew back together. And then he laughed. It was an innocent laugh, happy. He didn't sound tired and hungry like a man out of work. No, he sounded very full. "You can't be serious," Linda said incredulously. As she spoke the words, her fears slowly materialized before her as a shapely woman. He didn't deny it. "And all that money?" she asked, but didn't require his response. She saw the evidence in the great loss of years. "How long?" she demanded. She gathered herself but was unready for his response. "All along," he said. If he'd gone on to make other admissions, Linda heard none of it. She'd already dropped the line. In the years to follow, she often wondered what else might have been said had she not hung up the phone so swiftly. Would he have denounced the other woman right then and there? Perhaps she would have begged him to come to America anyway, with hopes that America absolves all sins. Or maybe she wouldn't have compromised family for dreams. And now here she was, with her American daughter, pregnant and petulant, feeling the full force of regret she had for so many years assuaged with her dogged acquisition of wealth. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Swati Khurana, and it's really an honor to be here at the Center for Fiction, among so many esteemed writers along the walls and in the audience. I'm going to be reading from my novel in progress, which is called The #1 Print Shop of Lahore. You were born to tell stories. You loved flying kites. You jumped on the bridge of boats. You looked down at the water between the floating edges. You said you thought you would fall, but you ran and skipped anyway. You had a mustache at the age of 9. You liked maths, but wanted to learn Italian. Your father laughed at you, but praised his ambitious Lahori boy in front of other people. You were 15 when you went to the tailor with pinstripe fabric to make a vest. You asked for a small breast pocket to be sewn on the left side. In it, you kept a small watch with a chain. Your dreams could not be contained by your life. You inherited a paper factory. You liked the smell of wet pulp, which was the smell of your father. You grew to like the smell of latex inks and citrus solvents, which became your smell. You made prints. You cleaned the roller. You polished the cylinder. You sorted the type into case drawers. You adjusted the spacers, kept edges straight and margins flush. You should have paid more attention to and read the actual words you were hand-setting. You say you are a man with few complications. Owl shit, I say. You say that I'm a simple woman. I say that you don't know a thing about me. I emerged from my mother with my right hand in a fist. I played by the river. I smelled the grass. My feet were hard and quick. I skipped high and ran fast. I became too old to play outside. I learned to roll thin, even chapatis and to quilt cushions from rugs. I learned Sanskrit. I went through the motions until him, not you, husband, but him, the Mahatma. The closest I was to ecstasy was that night at Sabramanti at his ashram. I watched a sleek amphibian thing climb against the cracks of the lime walls. When the sun was high above the banyan tree, the light made the walls shine a deep mustard. I thought so much about that lizard, moving through space, crack, puddle, roof. I wish I could have been that slick, juicy thing. But I too was strong, young, devout. The muscle of my thigh was flexed tight. I was supposed to be a female soldier of the revolution. That was my destiny. I wanted him to admire the perfect bend of my arm, lower back and knee as I marched. When I did seva, I thought of touching his clothes, rehanging them with my pins, wondering if I touched the khadi that caressed his flesh, and if that fiber touches my flesh, is our flesh meeting? So rarely would I see him in this place, but I could imagine him draped in white, his body skeletal, his skin tanned, his head bald, his face bespeckled. Would he allow women to march the Dandi to collect the contraband salt? By women, I meant me. I was the youngest in that place without mother or father. Like a tiger, I sprinted here after standard 10. I wanted to be part of something outside my body, nation, spirit, movement. But this is how Mahatma addressed the women that day. Just as Hindus do not harm a cow, the British do not attack women. For Hindus, it would be cowardice for us to have women accompany us. And like that, none of the 70 satyagrahis were women. Our job was to picket liquor and toddy shops. I decided to leave that place. I returned to Delhi to be with my parents, and the match they would find for me, you. I became a proper wife. I bore a child. She pierced my body. I begat another child, another girl. I learned to pleasure you, another pregnancy, a miscarriage, 2 more pregnancies, 2 more daughters. Try again, you said. Another try, another miscarriage. Another try, a boy. I carried him, birthed him, loved him. I watched him get sick. I heard the doctor say poliovirus. I heard you say iron lung. I saw his little neck strapped in an accordion neck brace. I fasted, I prayed, nothing worked. I wrapped him in a white cloth and watched his body burn along the guts. I wore white that day. My hair began to turn white. But you became darker, younger, fiercer. Your clothes were new and shiny, your shoes always polished, you had a skip in your step, a purpose in your gait. You began to come home later and later with whiskey on your breath and women on your skin. Your mouth could not contain the man you were becoming. Out of your mouth would spill these utterances. I am a poet. We should live outside of India. The nation needs a literature. I learned to watch your mouth move and hear no sound. I looked at the corner of your left eye to see how many creases appeared, because that is how I understood you. 1 line meant you were curious, 2 meant you were chipper, and 3 meant ecstasy. You said you should have kept a diary. You said your work log should have had more notes. You should have listened more keenly instead of spending all your time cleaning those rollers. Those broadsides you printed, the plates you etched, the maps you helped to fabricate, The weddings you announced, the posters you designed, the information you disseminated, a wiser man would have actually read what he was doing. A man who is rooted in this world would have actually paid attention and thought there could be consequences. But you are not that man. You never were that man. You were born to tell stories, you say. Tell me, what is our story? Thank you.
Hello. My name is Hafeez Lakhani, and it's a real honor to be here, to be reading for you guys. I wanted to quickly thank Noreen and Sarah especially, and my fellow fellows, and also the donors who make this program possible. Thank you. I'm going to read the opening pages of a novel I'm completing. It's called Naseeb or Not Naseeb. And it's the beginning, so you don't need any background, but it is a family saga about managing, you'll see. It was at University of Miami Hepatology Unit, 14th floor at Jackson Memorial, where I first learned Amina had less than 1 year to live. In quiet hospital room, where for many minutes I could only make out beeps of IV monitor, I worried first about children. Amina wanted them near. She wanted me near. It seemed these were the only things she wanted. Until then, changes in Amina seemed only to suggest aging. Adnan, she had cried in still dark, in her dream that morning. Adnan ko kya? What of Adnan? She had not seen her youngest, Adnan, in 3 years. She had not sat with him at breakfast table and sipped tea and laughed. Amina loved to sit for hours, cutting fruit, setting out dates and jabra mix, even after serving heaping omelets of onion and chili. Though recently Adnan had sent us tablet computer, and after instructing us by phone how to make video connection, he attempted on screen with pained expression in eyes to convince us that talking this way from Kinshasa or Monaco or Sardinia, wherever he was at present, was not such terrible alternative. It puzzled Amina that Adnan would not come to see us, but we could read in his face, even on sometimes blurry Skype screen, that he surely wished to, and perhaps it was his business that would not allow him at present. Chal Adnan, Amina said in her dream. Come, Adnan. Time ho gaya. Plane nikal jayengi. The time has come. Our plane will leave. Chal na. Sab peti andar dal diya. Come. Have you sent in all the suitcases? Amina had had nightmares before. She had mentioned airplane previously, but lately these seemed to increase alongside more changes. She was gaining weight. I had added many pounds over years, but Amina's recent increase felt of different cause. Her weight came not as soft flesh at sides, result of overeating like my own, but rather, maybe due to her thinness, something like swelling, as if she had received pregnancy at age 60. She felt tired too, always. She seemed to have lost energy for life. When 1 week before, our eldest, Amreen, called from New York, Amina did not feel compelled to speak. She did not ask Amreen about job. Amreen worked in share market, doing some sales in commodities, which I could never understand, nor whether Amreen had met any young man in Kane, what in our community we call our mosque, or if Amreen was eating enough and reciting dua each day. Only moments after I passed her phone, Amina passed it back, appearing tired, saying Amreen had some question for me, but Amreen did not. When finally I hung up, Amina's eyes had already shut. So urgently she felt need for sleep. Amina, I whispered beside her in bed, in midst of her dream. I touched my hand softly to her stomach. This was position of great intimacy for us. My one arm below her head, my other wrapped loosely around her. How we fell asleep nearly every night for more than 30 years. Amina, kahan ja rahe plane mein? Where are you going on this plane? Are Bombay, she said in frustration, like I was asking an unintelligent question. Bombay, then going by train to Rawalpindi. Abhi thoda time hai Janu, I told her, trying to reduce stress of her dream. There is still some time, I said, calling her my endearment, Jani, Janu, Jan Kebab, what we called each other ever since Amina was uniformed college girl in cycle-filled lanes of Rawalpindi. My life, or my spirit, Jan means, name which I believe I used first, when finally I found courage in those days to write letters in private to Amina. Zara bhi time nahi hai, Amina sang back, every part of her body shaking. There is not even one bit of time. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. My name is Danny Lorberbaum, and I'm going to be reading the beginning of a short story entitled Lindstrom. The man had walked for 3 days before he made it to the camp. This I only found out later, after he'd had a chance to fall. It was Blomquist, the cook's assistant, who found him. The man, whoever he was, lay face down in the snow near the hog lot, a heap of black, wet rags. Imagine Blomquist, of all people. Blomquist, who was 16 but looked 10, with hands as soft as a woman's. What he was doing out by the hog lot at that time of morning, when he should have been stoking our fires or filling our basins with washing water, that I don't know, but it's hardly worth my breath. He dragged the man through the snow by the ankles of his boots and into the bunkhouse, where we, 50 buckers, fallers, and river pigs, lay snoring, sleeping the sleep of the ancient dead. At 6, when the whistle blew, I sat up in my bunk. There were voices. In the shadows on the far side of the room, I spied a crowd of men hunched over a cot. I dressed, thinking perhaps it was an early morning card game, scoundrels still awake from the night before. Fools, in other words, the sort who meet their end under the weight of a fallen pine. Near the door, I gave my face a splash of cold water from a basin, no soap or shave for me, and exited the bunkhouse. Shack roofs outlined in snow, black shapes of men stumbling singly or in pairs, bent into the devilish eastern wind, holding on to what little warmth they could before it disappeared. It had snowed a good share so far this winter, more than last as I remembered it, though it always seemed that way, and another downfall was expected today. Already, flakes as fine as sand were falling, tickling my cheeks. I buried my chin in the neck of my coat and watched the path my boots chose. In the cookhouse, I sat myself in a corner. I'd made no delay in getting here. Few seats were taken. Those I saw before me were bearded men in furs and leathers, their lips nearly touching the edges of their bowls, the faster to get the hot meat down their gullets. Truth be told, it drained my appetite mighty quick to see men eating like common beasts, and I thought it best to hold my face in my hands and shut my eyes until my breakfast arrived. Lindstrom. I looked up to find Edwin beside me. His eyes were sunken, exhausted in their shadowy sockets. Have you heard the news? I shook my head. He sat in the chair opposite me. At that moment, Blomquist emerged from the kitchen with 2 bowls of roasted pork and 2 cups of steaming coffee. He set everything before us in his shy, womanly way. What luck, Edwin said. Let's have you tell it then. Tell you what? Blomquist asked. What do you think? The man you found in the snow. Let's have it. There isn't much to tell. I found him near the hog lot and brought him to the bunkhouse. That's really all I know. Now, the cook will be needing me. He showed us his backside, leaving Edwin to explain what he knew. The man was not one of ours, as Blomquist had first thought. They turned up his pockets and found no identification, a bit of money, a wad of scrips, no food. There was a rattle in his breath, but he was alive. Grease shined in the hair of Edwin's beard. I pushed my bowl of pork aside and took a swallow of coffee. Did you have a look at him? I asked. Looked Injun, I thought. Injun? Hard to say. Looked it to me leastways. Dressed in a sawyer's coat, but hair like an Injun, long and black. Skin like one, too. I looked out the window. It had started snowing hard. Oh, damn it all, I said, pounding the table. Look at that, Edwin said. It's the Lord's tears, and he's crying just for you. His lips were smiling, but his eyes were dark as wells. Sure enough, the snow fell harder and harder, and by breakfast end, it was clear there was no chance of going out. Some of the men took flasks from their coats and began to pass them round. Like that, a day's pay gone. I made my way outside. The fresh snow was thickening on the crust of what had fallen only days before. I dug out my tobacco tin and thumbed a fat plug in my cheek. Camp was quiet, the roar of wind in my ears, the creak and crack of swaying pines. It wouldn't be long before the men tired of one room and abandoned it for another, and no doubt by midday the lot of them would be good and drunk. Then where would I go? Presently, I walked along and spat my juices in the snow. Thank you.
I'm Zulma Ortiz-Fuentes, and I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, especially to my family and friends, and to the Center for Fiction for this tremendous opportunity. So I'd like to read a short story from a collection of linked stories that I'm writing, that I've written. And the collection follows a character named Margarita from age 6 to 25, and this story falls around the middle of the book. And it's titled Run Away With Me. Run away with me, he says. It's a common occurrence on the island, the thing to do when you can't or won't wait for a wedding. But it's the first time a man has proposed it to me. I wonder if he's serious. What will he do if I say yes? Maybe it's just a test to see how far I'll let him go. He accompanies the offer with a gentle swipe of a fingertip along the center of my palm, the one I've placed between us like an offering. The caress provokes a strange lick of excitement to shoot up my arm that hesitates at the top of the shoulder, unsure of where to go, of what to do with itself, and then quick like lightning plunges deep into my belly. Ruben takes the hand back immediately, while his eyes send a cautious glance around the second-floor balcony of my tío Jorge's house. I don't think he wants anyone else to overhear him proposition a 15-year-old whose father is a half-local Vietnam veteran. My pretendiente has been coming around in the afternoons for the last few weeks to visit his older sister, Andrea. Andrea is married to my uncle. They married 2 days after running off. Her parents weren't too happy about it since my uncle is just a factory worker. Ruben says he misses his sister, but I know he really comes around to be with me and to tell me I'm linda and what beautiful eyes I possess, words that sound like one of those boleros my mother likes to sing. He parks his old blue Rambler at the bottom of the hill and wanders up the path to my uncle's house, where I await impatiently on the balcony with hair that's freshly washed and smelling of lemon. On these afternoons, Andrea is our chaperone until she has to go make dinner for my uncle, who is usually working overtime. Before going into the house, she makes sure to give me a disapproving glare, like warning me to behave. Once we're alone, I tell Ruben stories about living in Texas, Colorado, and Germany, while he reveals little of himself. Tell me what he's like, I asked Andrea one afternoon, but she refuses to answer, only offers an abrupt, he has a novia, a high school sweetheart he's going to marry soon. I don't want to believe her. How could he have a novia? How could he sit on the balcony and call me bella and say my eyes have him embrujado, enchanted? He denies the girlfriend, but it might be true because I've noticed that men on the island like to offer you one hand while the other one is busy elsewhere. My mother is aware of our second-floor coqueteo, and just this morning gave me the same cantaleta she's been giving me since I became a señorita at 11. Be careful and keep your legs closed. She's afraid I'm going to meter las patas like cousin Lucy did. Lucy, who discovered the other family only after it was too late. She didn't come home one night, and that was that. By the end of the next day, the news was all over the barrio. Lucy se fugó. He took her. Lucy made her bed, and now she has to live with las consecuencias. That's what my aunt says when her daughter tries to come back home from the shanty town her lover takes her to, a place where women and children outnumber men, and where one morning a woman with a toddler on one hip and a belly about to burst appears on Lucy's doorstep. Yo soy su mujer, the woman declares. But Lucy has a belly too, and she's his woman also. I'm not stupid, even if I'm just a quinceañera, unaccustomed to piropos, the inventive pickup lines offered by the men on the island. In Colorado, where I lived before, the blonde, blue-eyed girls, the Cheryls and Lisas and Kimberlys, got all the attention. The brown-eyed, brown-haired, poorly dressed girls with café con leche skin, the Margaritas and Sonias and Marias, were invisible. Back in Puerto Rico, I discovered that men like different things. No skinny asses for them, because the bigger your nalgas, the more attention you get. Like Ida, I call La Gorda, the one who lives in the pink casita up the hill from my grandparents. She's plump and freckled, but when she wanders down that hill to go to the store or into town, men drool all over her behind as she saunters by. They say things like, tanta carne, and here I am starving to death, and por favor, mami, give me some of that meat. While my nalgas aren't so abundant, what I do have inspires young and old to declare themselves enamorados. Maybe because I look different from the other girls in my bell-bottom jeans and Jane Fonda shag haircut. They wonder about this gringa, as they call me. With so much temptation around me, it's easy to make mistakes that can't be fixed. But I'm becoming wise to the ways of men and the temptations of el amor. Although I'm intrigued by Ruben's slow fingertip across my palm, I'm not running away with him or anyone else, even if they promise me la luna y las estrellas. So in the end, I retrieve my hand, place it face down on my thigh, and with a flutter of my bruja eyes, I tell Ruben, my father will kill us both if I run away with you.
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Sheehan, and I just want to say thank you to Sarah, Noreen, the centre, all of you for coming out, and all of my fellow fellows. I think this is the first time a lot of us have heard or read each other's work, so it's lovely to get that opportunity. I'm going to read a section from toward the beginning of a novel that's set in Sarajevo, Dublin, and California in the mid-90s. And at this point, a guy is driving back a friend and another friend from the airport after picking one of them up. He spent 5 years under siege in Sarajevo, and this is the sort of nervous drive back from the airport in Dublin. We drive out past paunchy taxi men slow smoking on the hoods of their cars. Tom in the front, knees touching the glove compartment. Gus in the back, tapping epileptically on the loose window pane. He's had a jittery vibe to him for the past few weeks, and I can't tell if there's something other than Tom's return on his mind. I flick off the radio just before the hour turns, so that we miss the news. Tom's so dazed he probably isn't even listening, but if Gus hears the word Bosnia, he'll throw a shit fit that will put me off the road. The sky opens as we drive through the city, sloppy drops of rain bouncing off the deserted footpaths. The dirty Liffey water swells and churns like it's trying to digest the 1,000 mangled shopping trolleys that cart the riverbed. Two sullen junkies huddle together on the boardwalk, cursing through their shivers and tweaks. We had a friend once called Alan Cullen when we were kids. He was a wild, reckless little headcase who would do absolutely anything that popped into his mind, provided, of course, that no one else had the balls for it. Otherwise, what would be the point? He lived in a mouldy flat in the inner city with a mother who never spoke and 3 older brothers he never saw. His father was in prison for driving a getaway car in a botched bank robbery back in the late 70s when botched bank robberies were all the rage. He was a nice lad on his good days, but lost, hopelessly, cartoonishly lost. I once saw him beat 2 grown men into hysterics over a stray elbow in a McDonald's queue. When it was all over, the 2 of them bloodied and groaning on the sticky brown floor, He looked at his pulp knuckles like he'd forgotten to put the safety on, and burst into tears. Then, when we were about 16, some toothless freak who lived in the flat next door got him mixed up in heroin, and that was pretty much it for Alan. I watched him ghost away from us for a while, floating around the edges of house parties or the dimmest corners of the pool hall. I say watched because that's all it ever was. I never remember trying to intervene. Probably should have, at least once, I suppose, just so I could tell myself I'd done something. He turned up on my doorstep 6 months later, looking like the fucking Phantom of the Opera under a mask of purple bruises, and asked me for £10. I gave him a fiver and a cup of tea, but he was gone before it got cold. That was the last any of us ever saw of him. Now, whenever I pass the flocks of feral skeletons that congregate on Middle Abbey Street or down by the quays, I look for Alan. When he's had a few, Gus talks about him like he never really existed at all, like he was some imaginary sidekick we willed into being and then outgrew. I drive an arseways route to the house because I want to look out at Sandyman Strand as the last of the light leaves the sky. I do this most days. The tide is lolling back and forth, edging closer and closer to the piles of polished black rocks that coat the base of the harbour wall. In the distance, the lights of the power station chimneys flicker into life. Their red glow are the centrepiece of what passes for a skyline in this city. I've slowed the car right down to a crawl. Gus knows I do this. Ash drops from a cigarette while he's staring out into the ocean. He almost drowned out there once. The night we got our Leaving Cert results and celebrated by drinking warm cans of cheap cider and 2 thick green bottles of sparkling wine, the labels long since peeled away, left to die at the back of someone's parents' liquor cabinet. Sitting around the world's smallest bonfire, roaring and laughing over school stories we all knew by heart, and earnestly predicting futures that would never materialise. The night Clara Hennessy and me had sex for the first time on a blanket at the far end of the beach, fumbling and giggling and grasping at each other until we fell asleep pressed tight together, rolled up in that brown, sand-wracked blanket like a giant, boozy cigar. The night Tom told me he didn't think he'd be sticking around Dublin for too much longer. If he hadn't wandered off on his own that night, no one would have heard Gus's last hopeless yelps as the waves we never took all that seriously pulled his lumbering frame, still dressed in an army jacket, blue jeans and caterpillar boots, below the surface of the water. Thank you.
I'm Erin Somers. I'm delighted and honored to be here, so thanks to everybody, thanks to all relevant parties. This is a very short story called Canine. I wanted to capture that effortless French feeling, so I made ratatouille. Afterward, the apartment smelled like Provence, if what Provence smells like is eggplant burning in the bottom of the oven. There were tomatoes left over, so I used them to make lasagna. It called for part skim ricotta, and when there was some left over, I tried not to lose heart. Was there no way to get anything exactly right? I made pancakes with the ricotta. I used a fancy recipe with lemon from a book with the most beautiful pictures. After the pancakes were done, I had extra lemons. Making lemonade seemed too on the nose, and anyway, enough was enough, so I threw them out the window. I was trying to be a goddess of the domestic arts, but now I had a fridge full of weird food and a guy out on the street shouting up at me, "Hey!" "Sorry for the lemons," I shouted down, when what I really meant to say was, "You're welcome for the lemons. Lemons are useful." Next thing I knew, he was clomping up the stairs and banging on the door. It was my husband, and he wanted to know why I'd pelted him with lemons, and further, why I'd had the locks changed. "I don't know what you're talking about," I called through the door, feigned ignorance being the cornerstone of any good marriage. It seemed like he wanted to stand there shouting for a while, shouting and banging, so I cleaned the sideboard with a bucket of foamy wood soap and hot water. I cleaned the credenza, too. I hoped they gleamed forever like in the commercial, but when they dried, they looked the same as always. What a disappointment. My husband was whimpering a little now, pleading. I attempted to slide him a couple pancakes under the door to shut him up, but it didn't work. The crack wasn't big enough. They smooshed against the door jamb, a testament to their fluffiness. "I tried," I called to him, turning my back on his reply. I fed the baby some applesauce and ate some myself. Keep your pores clear and your waist slim by eating like a baby. That could be a headline in a women's magazine. I heard myself shout this to my husband. What? He said. The baby looked from me to the door, me to the door. She knew there was something afoot, but she didn't have the words. Nothing, I said to both of them. Nothing you would understand. I made myself beautiful. I used the black eye gunk and the red lipstick. I was careful. If you go too far beyond the outline of your lips, that's a tell. The soft red tip of the lipstick kissed my tooth for a second. It was the mean one, the canine. I smiled at myself in the mirror. The tooth looked bloody. I could still hear him out there. Be reasonable, he rasped. Open the door. I felt I was being mostly reasonable. Just look, for instance, at the sideboard. Look at the full refrigerator. Look at the baby, alive and fat. Look at my face, colored in nicely. Look at the canine I ultimately wiped off. Because of course I had. Of course I had. Thanks.